My wife filed for divorce, thinking she would get half. She forgot I had a prenup she signed to shut her parents up. Her lawyer's face, when he read the terms, was priceless. She got what she deserved, nothing. The words felt flat and heavy. Not like the triumphant victory declaration they should have been. I reread the email I was drafting to Robert, my attorney, and realized the satisfaction was purely administrative. The emotion had been bled out over 7 years of marriage, leaving behind only meticulous bookkeeping. I was sitting in my office, not the ranch house I bought and rebuilt, but my professional fortress, the commercial building. It was 5:45 in the morning, and the January chill outside made the thick concrete walls feel like a necessary defense. The air smelled of clean electrical solvents and old, growth lumber. The next day I proposed with a 50, a much better scent than the passive aggression that used to cling to the ranch house. This building was the foundation of everything. I bought the old automotive garage back in 2016 when the owner was desperate, sinking every penny and 6 months of nights and weekends into converting it. I paid for it with money I earned after 4 years of apprenticeship and 2 years learning the business side from my old boss. Every dollar was stained with sweat and the smell of ozone. At 34, I was responsible for 8 employees and a solid book of commercial contracts. This place, this business, was not just my livelihood. It was the entire argument against the shame I felt as a kid who had nothing. It was the physical manifestation of my life's primary truth. Reliance is a vulnerability. Only self-sufficiency provides safety. My external goal, my want, had always been simple stability. I wanted to build a world where the floorboards didn't rot out from under me. I printed the final divorce decree summary, placing it next to the thick, yellowed copy of the prenuptial agreement. It was the only contract I had ever signed that felt like a compromise, yet it was the only one that saved me. I thought back to the beginning, to the year before the wedding. The first time I met Britney's parents, Richard and Patricia. It was Thanksgiving 2016, and the atmosphere in their ridiculous McMansion was thicker than the gravy. I showed up in a clean button, down in khakis, parking my Ford F-250 next to their Mercedes and Range Rover. Patricia looked at my truck like I had tracked mud onto her Italian marble. Richard's handshake was an effortful display of dominance. The dinner was not a meal, it was an interrogation designed to assess my value as a potential in-law. "So, you're an electrician?" Richard had asked, cutting his steak with unnecessary violence. "That's blue-collar work, right? Do you see yourself staying in that field long term?" I didn't flinch. I told them, "I own the company. We're growing." They didn't hear owner. They heard electrician. They couldn't reconcile my assets. The appreciating ranch house I fixed myself. The newly acquired commercial building. With the fact that I worked with my hands. The conversation that truly mattered. The one that set this entire 7-year tragedy in motion, happened 2 months later. We were at their country club. A place where the waiter ordered for you without asking, a power move I hated. Richard, without preamble, dropped the bomb. "We've been talking to our attorney, and we really think you two should have a prenuptial agreement." just to protect everyone's interests. Britney's face went white. She clearly hadn't been looped into the final, aggressive stage of the plan. Dad, we already talked about this. I know what we talked about. Richard cut her off, his voice smooth and cold. But Patricia and I have significant assets that we plan to pass down to Britney eventually. We need to make sure those assets stay in the family. It was the oldest trick in the book, ensuring the poor electrician didn't touch the sacred family trust. But instead of arguing or feeling offended, I simply nodded. Actually, I think that's a smart idea, I said, picking up my fork. I've got my business and some assets too. Probably makes sense to keep things separate. The look on Richard's face, a subtle shift from expectant condescension to genuine surprise, was the first real victory I ever took from them. He expected resistance, a fight he could win by flexing his wealth. He didn't expect a counter-strategist. This was my inciting incident, my invitation to turn their defensive maneuver into my impenetrable fortress. I closed the safe, the sound of the tumblers clicking shut, echoing in the quiet office. The contract was signed to keep their assets in, but the key clauses were added to keep mine locked tight. I slipped the decree into my briefcase, ready to meet Robert one last time. The future was not about being loved, it was about being unassailable. Agreeing to the prenup was easy. Making sure it worked for me, however, was a 3-week lesson in legal maneuvering. Richard expected me to sign a quick, insulting document designed only to shield his eventual millions from the blue-collar electrician. I was fine with them protecting their money. I just wasn't fine with them stripping me of mine. Robert, my attorney, was the first one to laugh. We were in his downtown office in late March, 2 months before the big, over-the-top wedding Patricia was already micromanaging. "Dealin'," Robert had said, folding the 12-page draft Richard's lawyer sent over. "This is geniusly self-serving. It protects every single potential gift, inheritance, and trust fund Britney might ever touch. But it doesn't protect you at all." "Exactly," I replied. "So we fix it." My existing assets were easy: the ranch house, the commercial building, the original business valuation. Those were clearly separate property, purchased and developed before the marriage. The real battle was the future. My business, even at 27, was on an upward trajectory. I was betting on myself, and I wasn't about to sign over half of my future hard work to someone who already thought my career was beneath them. One need the appreciation clause airtight, I instructed Robert. If the house triples in value over the next decade, that increase stays mine because the house itself was purchased with separate funds. But the most important thing is the business income. That was the key. We added an aggressive clause defining separate funds as including any money derived from my existing business, even after we were married. The argument was, since I owned the company before the wedding, all its profits, whether used to buy a new property or pay down a mortgage, were generated by a separate entity and should remain separate property. Richard's lawyer, a silk-suited shark named Henderson, fought us tooth and nail. They wanted the growth in the business value, the increase driven by my sweat, not hers, to be marital property. They wanted half the company, I was still killing myself to build. Your client wants protection for generational wealth, Robert told Henderson over a tense conference call. I listened in awe. My client wants protection for the wealth he is building with his own two hands. Either we both get it, or neither of us does. The negotiations stalled. Henderson, under pressure from Richard, played the final, nastiest card. He hinted that perhaps they would reconsider the whole wedding if I wasn't willing to be reasonable. I called Britney that night. She was at her parents' house, probably doing a taste test for some artisanal canapes. Your dad is threatening to cancel the wedding because I won't give him half my business, I said, keeping my voice level. There was a silence, then a sharp, panicked intake of breath. The wedding, the venue, the 250 guests, the flowers, was Britney's whole identity at that moment. She didn't care about the asset split. She cared about the social spectacle. Are you serious, Dylan?
Tell him you'll sign it.
We can't cancel everything now, she wailed. Tell your dad that's fine with me, I countered, firmly. We can skip the expense and go to the courthouse. We keep the money for our actual future. It's either that, or he backs off my business terms. The panic was palpable. Within 48 hours, Henderson called Robert. Richard had folded. The wedding, the status symbol, was more important than the legal fight. The final version of the prenup was a masterpiece of legal engineering. It protected everything I owned before the marriage, and anything I acquired with business funds during the marriage, explicitly including any appreciation in value, rents, profits, or other returns on said property. It was my quiet, strategic weapon. The signing was the most surreal moment. We met at Henderson's office on a Thursday afternoon. Britney wore leggings and a designer sweatshirt rushing. She was 24, a college graduate, a dental hygienist, perfectly capable of understanding a contract. Henderson tried, to his credit. Miss Peterson, this is a legally binding contract that will govern the division of property if you divorce. You really should review these terms carefully. This protects his business assets and any property he acquires with business funds. Britney didn't even look up from her phone. She was texting her bridesmaids about the seating chart. I don't care, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. I'm not marrying him for his money. This whole prenup thing is just to shut my parents up about keeping their precious inheritance safe. Can we please just sign it and be done? I have a dress fitting in 40 minutes. Henderson sighed, the sound carrying the weight of professional frustration. He pointed to the signature lines. We both signed. The document was notarized, witnessed, and fully legal. Britney thought. She was doing the bare minimum to facilitate her wedding. I knew I had just saved my life's work. I walked out of that office feeling like I had just built the strongest foundation of all. One made of paper and law, protecting me from the emotional vulnerability I now feared. I had achieved the external want, securing my future, but I had also reinforced the internal belief that absolute self-reliance was the only way to survive. The wedding was a gaudy monument to Richard and Patricia's social standing, a 250-person affirmation that Britney had indeed married up, or at least married someone whose business provided a stable income stream, which was apparently an achievement in their circle. The entire production was paid for by them, and their toast was less about our future and more about their financial generosity. It was the last time I truly tried to integrate into their world. The first couple of years were deceptive. We were okay. Britney was working at the dental office, bringing in about $45,000 a year. I was running hard, putting in 60-hour weeks to grow the business. My income was solid, well into six figures, and the business was expanding its client base into industrial work, which was far more profitable than residential. The issues started with the drip, not the flood. Britney was always a little spendy, but it ramped up when she realized my income could absorb her overflow. New clothes every week, a $300 haircut every 6 weeks, standing appointments for manicures. All the typical things, except now. Her $45,000 salary only covered about half of her personal expenses. The rest silently bled out of the joint checking account, which I almost exclusively funded. I didn't mind carrying the financial weight, but I began to resent the lack of respect for the effort it took to earn that money. My spending was almost exclusively investment-based, commercial-grade tools that cost money but lasted decades, or maintenance for my Ford F-250 work truck, which was a necessity, not a luxury. More tools. How many do you need, Dylan? She'd ask, rolling her eyes as I unloaded a new set of circuit testers that cost $3,000, tools that would pay for themselves on the next big contract. She'd say, it while wearing a jacket that cost more than the tools themselves. The real friction came when I started leveraging the business profits to secure my assets further, according to the secret blueprint in the Prenup. My business was growing, and I wanted to ensure every dime of that growth was protected. In the middle of our third year, I landed a huge, lucrative contract, a full rewire of an old warehouse. I took $5,000 of the dollars of the profit and threw it directly at the principal balance of the commercial building mortgage. Saving money on future interest was the most satisfying thing I could do with cash flow. When she saw the bank transfer alert on her phone, she waited until I was home, tired and smelling of metal shavings, to explode.
You threw $5,000 at a building.
We could have gone to Hawaii with that money. We could be sitting on a beach right now, drinking cocktails, but instead, you're throwing money at some ugly garage nobody cares about. The utter contempt for my life's work stunned me. That ugly garage generates $2,500 a month in rental income from the HVAC company. It's an investment, Britney. Every dollar I pay down now saves us $3 in interest over the life of the loan. Everything's an investment with you. She shot back, her voice tight with resentment. Everything's about the future, the business, the property. When do we get to just enjoy life? When do I get to enjoy life? You can enjoy life with the money you earn. I snapped, the fatigue and frustration boiling over. It was a cold, pragmatic line, but it was also true. She didn't speak to me for 3 days after that. That was the turning point. She quit her job soon after. She just came home one day and announced she was done. claiming the dental office was too stressful, and the pay wasn't worth it. For 6 months, she did absolutely nothing but shop, lunch with friends, and visit her parents. My income covered everything. Her $850 car payment for the new Lexus she had to have, all the utilities, the mortgage, the groceries. Her financial contribution was zero. When I brought it up, she used my own words against me. "You're always saying we should spend more time together." "Well, now I'm available," she'd argue. Even though she was always busy with her parents, charity events or girls' trips, she wasn't available to me. She was available to the lifestyle my income provided. I retreated into my work and my blueprints. If the marriage was a hostile financial environment, I would fortify my position. I threw myself into growing the company, expanding from 4 to 8 employees, adding a second location, and acquiring 2 more investment properties, a duplex and a small office building. Every purchase was meticulously documented as being paid for with business income, making it separate property under the prenup's terms. Britney never noticed. She never asked about the new contracts, the growth, or the properties. She had no idea the business was doubling in value, or that my net worth was becoming astronomical. I never volunteered the information. We were no longer spouses, we were roommates, separated by a gulf of ambition and respect, living under the enforced peace of my growing emotional isolation. I clung tighter to the lie. My self-built fortress was the only safe place left. The marriage finally ended not with a bang, but with the clatter of a laptop being set on the kitchen counter. It was late January of our 7th year. The air outside was cold enough to crack pavement, and I was exhausted, having just wrapped up a huge municipal contract that secured my financials for the next year. I came home around 7, ready only for a shower and the merciful silence of my own company. Britney was sitting at the kitchen table, a sheaf of printed papers spread out next to her open laptop. She had a strange energy, nervousness mixed with a barely contained, expectant excitement. It was the look of someone waiting for a jackpot. "We need to talk," she said. The line was a cliché, but I didn't laugh. I just walked to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. I had been waiting for those 4 words for about 3 years. "Okay," I replied, sitting down across from her. I kept my face utterly neutral. "I'm not happy, Dylan. I haven't been happy for a long time. This marriage isn't working." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've noticed. I think we should get divorced." Then, my calm reaction seemed to deflate her slightly. She had clearly rehearsed a speech expecting tears, begging, or at least an argument. She looked genuinely thrown off. "That's it? Just all right?" she demanded, sounding cheated of a dramatic scene. "Britney, we've barely been married for the last 3 years. We don't talk. We don't spend time together. We are basically strangers living in the same house. You want a divorce? Fine. Let's make it clean and fast." She recovered quickly, and the predatory smirk returned, signaling she was moving past the emotional script and onto the financial one. "Well, I've actually already talked to a lawyer, just to understand my options." "Smart," I said. The next day I proposed with a 50, and he explained that even though we have that prenup thing, I'm still entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. Any appreciation in the house value, half of your retirement contributions, half the business growth. She looked down at the notes on her laptop, reciting the points like a school report. The prenup only protects the value from this before we got married. Any increase is marital property. Plus, I'm entitled to spousal support since I earn less than you, and I've been a homemaker for part of our marriage. The word, homemaker, almost made me choke on my water, but I held it together. The sheer, audacious entitlement of her demand was astonishing. She was confidently claiming half of a life I had spent 7 years meticulously shielding from her. The growth she saw was the direct result of my relentless work she routinely mocked. You've talked to a lawyer about all this already, I repeated, letting the weight of her betrayal sink in. Obviously. I'm not stupid, Dylan. I know my rights. Good for you, I said, standing up. I'll get my attorney to draw up the paperwork then. She stood up too, confusion returning to her face. What? Don't you want to talk about this? Try counseling or something. You just said you're not happy and you want a divorce. You've already talked to a lawyer about taking half my stuff. What exactly would counseling accomplish? I countered. You've already ended the marriage in your head. If you want out, let's make it clean. Realizing she wasn't going to get her fight, she retreated. Fine. My lawyer said he'd send you the divorce petition within the next week. You'll be served at work probably. Cool, I said. I'll watch for it. She grabbed her laptop and the papers. Marching upstairs, no doubt calling her mother or friends to report my cold, unromantic surrender. I didn't care. The minute the door clicked shut, I pulled out my phone and called Robert. Robert, it's Dylan. Britney just filed. She thinks she's getting half the appreciation on everything. There was a pause on the line. Do you still have a copy of the prenup? Yeah, in my safe. Good. Get it to me, Dylan. I want to review the exact language before her attorney comes at us. I drove it to Robert's office that afternoon. As I sat across from him, watching his face move from interested to amused, I felt the first real wave of calm I'd had since the confrontation. He stopped reading halfway through the clause we had fought so hard for, the one about business income being separate property. Robert looked up, an outright grin spreading across his face. Did she actually read this before signing? Not really. Said she was on her phone the whole time, just signing it to shut her parents up. He laughed, a deep, satisfied chuckle. She's about to get a very expensive lesson in reading contracts. This thing is airtight. Your house appreciation, the commercial building, the business growth, all protected. Even the money you earned during the marriage, since it came from the business. She's not getting anything, Dylan. We are going to wipe the table clean. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 7 years finally lifted. The lie I held, that reliance is vulnerability, had forced me to be cold and strategic, but that cold strategy had saved my life's work. The fortress was complete. The relief I felt in Robert's office was immediately replaced by a surge of professional anticipation. The confrontation was over, The strategy phase had begun. 2 days after the divorce conversation, Britney moved out. She packed her clothes, her personal items, and went straight back to her parents' McMansion. She left behind everything else in the ranch house, confirming her view of it as nothing more than a temporary rental subsidized by me. I changed the locks, feeling a profound sense of quiet descend upon the house. I hadn't realized how much her resentment had charged the atmosphere until it was gone. I was finally sleeping soundly again. True to her word, I was served the divorce petition at the commercial building the following week. It was a thick stack of papers detailing her demands. Half the appreciation in the house, half the business value increase since 2017, half my retirement contributions, and $3,000 a month in spousal support for 5 years. She wanted to keep the Lexus too, of course, the vehicle I had been making the $850 monthly payments on. Her lawyer, the silk-suited shark named Henderson, requested mediation. Robert and I agreed immediately. We were ready for the fight, but if we could end it quickly and cleanly, all the better. We met in a soulless conference room downtown in March. Britney arrived with her mother, Patricia, who had no legal standing but was clearly there for moral support and to project status. Britney was dressed immaculately, looking like she was interviewing for a position as a trophy wife, not defending her financial choices in court. I showed up in jeans and a work shirt. I had a commercial installation to finish later that afternoon. My priorities were clear. Henderson opened the meeting by laying out their position, speaking in grand, legalistic terms about Britney's contributions. My client deserves half of the marital estate, Henderson declared, puffing up his chest. She supported Mr. Peterson during the marriage and sacrificed her career, allowing him to focus on his business's rapid growth. Robert didn't utter a word. He simply reached into his briefcase and slid the manila folder containing the original prenuptial agreement across the large, polished table. He pointed a long finger at the middle of the document. Read page 3, section 4. Robert instructed in a calm, flat tone that commanded immediate attention. I watched Henderson's face as he read. It was a beautiful study in professional disintegration. The confident smirk faded first. Then, confusion set in as he processed the highly specific language we had insisted on. He flipped the pages, rapidly scanning the clauses, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper as he realized the depth of the hole his client was in. He flipped to page 7, where we defined separate funds derived from the pre-marital business. His whole posture changed, the confidence vanished, replaced by a cold nod of concern. Henderson cleared his throat. "Can we have a moment with our client?" he asked, his voice noticeably tighter than before. Britney, who had been sitting there radiating haughty expectation, looked suddenly furious. Patricia looked utterly confused. They retreated to the hallway, arguing in hushed but sharp tones. I stayed put, sipping the conference room's terrible, lukewarm coffee. It was the most satisfying, peaceful coffee I'd ever tasted. This was the moment of consequences, the turning point, where the lie she lived finally collided with the contract she ignored. When they returned, Henderson's tone was entirely different. subdued, almost defeated. My client is willing to negotiate on the spousal support amount. He offered, his eyes darting between me and Robert. Robert didn't pause or hesitate. No spousal support. He cut him off. She voluntarily quit a $45,000 a year job. She spent the majority of the marriage living entirely off my client's separate income, contributing nothing to the household or the business. She works part-time now. She is employable. The judge will not be sympathetic to a claim for long-term support. Patricia, horrified by the immediate rejection, interjected.
That's ridiculous.
She gave up her career. A dental hygienist job paying $45,000 a year is not a career sacrifice that necessitated living off my client's back for 7 years. Robert replied flatly, his eyes fixed on Henderson. And she did it of her own choice, not to support my client's business or relocate for his job. She just didn't feel like working anymore. Henderson tried to pivot to the house appreciation. The house increase in value must be marital property. The house was purchased before the marriage with my client's separate funds. Robert said, referencing the document again. All renovations and improvements were paid for with separate business funds. The prenup states clearly that property purchased with separate funds remains separate, including any appreciation in value. The business value increase, also protected under the prenup, as derived from the original separate entity. It's spelled out on page 4. I sat there, silent, watching the man realize his entire case was built on the quicksand of his client's arrogant ignorance. Britney looked like she was about to weep, finally grasping that the prenup thing she signed had not just shielded her parents' money, but completely eliminated her access to mine. So, what exactly is your client offering? Henderson asked, defeated. Britney keeps her personal belongings, her jewelry, and her clothes. She can keep the Lexus if she assumes the full loan balance, which is a community debt she insisted on taking out. My client keeps everything else. No spousal support. That's it. The mediation ended with no agreement, but the true negotiation was already over. Henderson vowed they would see us in court. I didn't care. The integrity of my fortress was confirmed. The money I had fought to protect was safe. Now, all that remained was the final, satisfying blow of the hammer. The failure of mediation meant the gloves were off. Henderson, now fully aware of the prenup's devastating strength, was forced to execute a scorched earth discovery strategy to find any loophole. He was looking for evidence of co-mingling. A single misplaced dollar that could argue the separate property had become marital. For the next several months, the law office was less a battleground and more a siege. I handed over boxes of financial documents, my business accounts, rental ledgers for the commercial properties, the mortgage records, and every single receipt for renovations on the ranch house, dating back 10 years. Robert was methodical. He assembled a binder that was easily 3 inches thick. A comprehensive history of my finances. Tab 1. The 2014 purchase of the ranch house with pre-marital funds. Tab 2. The 2016 purchase of the commercial building, also separate property. Then came the critical evidence. Every mortgage payment, every renovation expense, every new asset acquisition, all traceable directly back to the business operating account, proving they were paid for with separate funds derived from the business, as defined in Section 2.1 of the Prenup. Henderson fought back hard, filing motion after motion. He claimed Britney didn't have independent legal counsel when she signed the agreement. That motion was dead on arrival. We produced the affidavit from her signing attorney, the one Richard had hired, confirming that he had explicitly explained the terms to her and that she had been given every opportunity to review the document, but chose not to. Then came the accusation of coercion, arguing she was forced to sign just 2 months before the wedding. But the documentation showed she was 24, a college graduate, employed, and had plenty of time to back out had she chosen to. Her case was being defeated not by malice, but by paper. The ongoing fight, however, forced me to confront the ghost of my past, my deep-seated fear of financial abandonment. Every single document request, every accusation that I was somehow cheating or hiding money, felt like a personal attack on the sacrifices I had made. It brought back the old sting of judgment I felt from Richard and Patricia. They were effectively saying, "You don't deserve this wealth because you work with your hands." My entire structure, my very definition of safety, felt at risk, even though I knew the law was on my side. This was my lowest point. The money was safe, but the memory of why I built the fortress was agonizingly fresh. Henderson's last, desperate move was bringing in a financial expert to testify about the monetary value of Britney's marital contributions. This was the moment I was truly forced to face the transactional emptiness of our relationship. The expert's argument was that Britney, by being present and maintaining the household, was owed compensation. When Robert Cross examined him, the turning point action began. "What specific household duties did your client perform?" Robert asked the expert. The expert faltered, shuffling his notes. He had to admit that the house was cleaned by a monthly service because Britney refused to do it. The yard work and all maintenance were handled by me. The cooking was minimal. So, based on your market analysis, what exactly did Miss Peterson contribute to the household? Robert pressed, his voice sharp and incredulous. The expert settled on the softest, most subjective answer he could find. She provided emotional support and companionship. Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Is there a market rate for emotional support and companionship, sir? Because that sounds like the very definition of a marriage, which is what this was. My client is not required to pay her for the 7 years she chose to be married to him." The courtroom could see it. The expert could see it, and Henderson definitely saw it. The argument was gutted. Britney had not been a partner. She had been a dependent, and there was no clause in the law or the prenup that entitled her to half of my construction company for being a reluctant tenant. The confrontation with the expert forced me to realize that while my self-reliance had saved me from being stripped financially, the ultimate victory wasn't in keeping the money, but in releasing the need to prove my worth to her. My fortress of money was safe, but now I had to build a fortress of peace. Meanwhile, Henderson, fearing his reputation was on the line with the wealthy in-laws, started pushing hard for a settlement. They offered to drop the spousal support if I would just give Britney $20,000. Robert said no. They offered to walk away if I just hand over the Lexus, free and clear. Robert said she could keep the car, but she was taking the full loan balance with it. They were desperate, and the pressure was building toward the final showdown. I was living my life again, working, investing, and finally, truly sleeping. The stress of the legal fight was nothing compared to the daily stress of being married to someone who despised my success while demanding half of it. The path to the final decree was clear. The final court date arrived in August, bright and hot, a stark contrast to the cold, dead silence of the relationship we were burying. I took the morning off work, showing up in slacks and a button-down shirt, feeling no nervousness, only a quiet certainty rooted in 7 years of documented diligence. Britney was already there, looking pale and miserable, dressed in a black suit that seemed more appropriate for a funeral. Her parents, Richard and Patricia, flanked her, a bizarre show of force, or perhaps desperation. Henderson, her lawyer, looked nervous, his expensive suit rumpled, the weight of the failed mediation and discovery loss hanging heavy on him. We stood before the judge, a woman in her early 50s who possessed a calm, efficient demeanor that promised no tolerance for drama or fluff. Henderson made his last stand, arguing passionately about the inherent unfairness of the outcome, the unconscionable nature of the agreement, as applied after 7 years of marriage, and Britney's so-called contribution to the household. He talked about equity and marital sacrifice, terms that withered under the weight of Robert's financial binder. Robert, as always, was concise. He presented the documents, one by one: the affidavit confirming Britney received legal counsel, the bank statements proving that every major asset acquired or improved upon was done so with separate business funds, and the prenup itself, open to the key clause defining business income as separate property. The judge listened carefully, occasionally interrupting with a pointed question about the asset trail. She absorbed the facts, then pushed the papers aside. She looked directly at Britney. "Miss Peterson?" the judge asked, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet courtroom. "Did you read this prenuptial agreement before signing it?" Britney's head snapped up. She looked terrified, the pressure of her entire family watching finally crushing her confident facade. The question bypassed the lawyers, the documents, and the years of emotional avoidance. It was the moment of truth. I skimmed it, Your Honor," Britney said, barely audible. "Did your attorney, whom your father provided, explain the terms to you? Specifically the clauses regarding property acquired with business income?" "Yes, but I didn't think." Her voice trailed off. Unable to voice the thought. "I didn't think it would matter." "You didn't think it would matter." The judge finished for her, her tone professional, but laced with clear disappointment. "Miss Peterson, you are a 24-year-old college graduate who had independent legal representation and who signed a contract explicitly protecting your spouse's separate property, including its appreciation. You signed this agreement 2 months before your wedding, with ample opportunity to withdraw or seek further counsel. This court finds no evidence of coercion, and the agreement, which was entered into by both parties to protect their respective assets, including your future family inheritance, is neither invalid nor unconscionable. Henderson immediately jumped in. Desperate, Your Honor. My client was young and didn't fully understand the technicalities of the business
Income clause.
Your client made a choice. Counsel. The judge cut him off, staring directly at Henderson. And now she has to live with the legal consequences of that choice. The judge ruled completely in my favor. No spousal support. The house, the commercial properties, the retirement accounts, the business, all were confirmed as my separate property. She kept her personal belongings, her jewelry, and the Lexus, along with its loan, which she was solely responsible for paying. The marriage was dissolved. It was over. 7 years reduced to a 2-minute ruling based entirely on the contract I had insisted upon. The contract she had ignored. I collected my copies of the finalized decree and walked out of the courtroom, Robert congratulating me quietly beside me. In the hallway, the consequences were playing out in stark, human drama. Britney was sobbing uncontrollably into Patricia's immaculate shoulder. Patricia was glaring at me with a hatred so profound it felt volcanic, as if I had personally engineered the last 7 years just for this moment. Richard, however, looked utterly defeated, staring at the floor, the architect of his daughter's downfall, finally realizing how his insistence on protecting his money had resulted in his daughter walking away with nothing. The irony was perfect. I just kept walking. I didn't say a word to any of them. There was no need for confrontation or gloating. The legal documents spoke the truth more eloquently than any shouted word ever could. I got into my F-250, the truck she once ridiculed, and drove straight back to the commercial building. I had an emergency panel upgrade to finish before the end of the week. I had work to do, and finally, my work was entirely my own. The air in the truck felt clean, the weight I had carried for so long completely gone. The lie that I had to control everything to be safe had won the legal battle, but the ensuing quiet promised a chance at the truth. The marriage was legally finalized in September. 7 years gone, and I walked away with exactly what I had walked in, with my business, my properties, and my future intact. The quiet satisfaction I felt was deep, but it wasn't arrogant. It was the peace of a problem solved efficiently. Word got around our old social circle quickly. Most people were genuinely shocked Britney got nothing. They heard her version, of course, that I had screwed her over and left her broke. But the people who mattered, my few real friends, the guys who had seen her open contempt for my work, they understood. A few weeks after the decree, my buddy Kevin, whose wedding was the night I met Britney, called me up. "Dude, I heard about the divorce. You all right?" "Better than I've been in years." I told him honestly. I realized I was sleeping better. My focus at work was sharper, and my weekends were actually restful again. The constant, low-level stress of resentment was gone. "Britney's telling people you ruined her life," Kevin warned me. "Says you stole 7 years and left her with nothing." Britney can tell people whatever she wants, I said, looking out the window of my office at the commercial building I owned. The legal documents tell the real story. And for what it's worth, man, I always thought she was using you. She talked about your money more than she talked about you. That tracked with everything I had ignored during the marriage. I had been so focused on protecting myself from the financial trauma of my past, so obsessed with myself, built fortress, that I mistook transactional convenience for love. The Lee, that I had to control everything to be safe, had saved my assets, but it had also guaranteed my emotional isolation. Now, sitting alone in my quiet house, I realized the ultimate victory was not the paperwork, it was the emptiness she left behind, which was not lonely, but peaceful. I didn't need to control a partner, I needed to choose one who respected the effort, not just the income. That was the truth. Last I heard through the mutual friend network, Britney had to move back in with her parents. Her part-time boutique job didn't last, and she was struggling to afford the kind of apartment she felt she deserved. She was still bitter, still convinced she was owed a lifestyle she hadn't earned. I stood up and walked over to my drafting table. I had been looking at floor plans for a new investment property, another duplex, but I hadn't been motivated. I looked at the old blueprints, then at a fresh sheet of tracing paper. This time, the ambition didn't feel defensive. It wasn't about fear, it was about creation. I picked up my pencil. I started drafting the schematic for the duplex, carefully calculating the electrical load and the plumbing layout. I was building again, but this time, the blueprint was for my own peace, my own future, unburdened by the need to prove my worth to anyone else. The fortress was safe, and the architect was finally free.